What is the mind? The mind is the space through which we define and experience reality. It paints our experience with the colours of judgment, dissatisfaction, rules, limitations, and stories. And the mind, it can spin a vast variety of different stories and narratives, which in turn influence the reality that we end up perceiving. And if we do not become conscious of the mind and its machinations, we put ourselves at risk, essentially, of being unconsciously swept up into a story of our own creation. The danger lies in failing to see stories as stories. Many people have a tendency to see their stories as reality, and this misunderstanding makes you a prisoner of your own mental limitations, judgments, and assumptions. To awaken, therefore, is to become conscious of the mind and the way in which it manifests various thought forms in reaction to particular situations. Rarely do we go throughout our days in complete silence unless we are enlightened yogis. But most of us, the mind is constantly and persistently active, producing thoughts about the world, our situation in this world, and our obligations. These thoughts, they will arise naturally throughout our day. And some of these thoughts are helpful. Some of these thoughts support our peace, joy, and well-being. However, some of them are negative, and they can draw us into denser states of being, states of fear, states of lethargy, dissatisfaction, anxiety, or even depression. And without awareness, we can become prisoner to these negative patterns. We can become gripped by thoughts that present the world as dangerous or full of threats to be avoided. And the mind, it can spin endless scenarios of failure, of loss, convincing us to prepare for the worst. And few people really have a tendency to think in terms of how things can go well, or how the world might perhaps support their dreams. We're taught to dismiss such optimistic possibilities as unrealistic, favouring instead a limited, a more constrained, a more realistic version of life. And society, it plays a role in this. Society will impose certain limitations on thoughts and our aspirations to ensure that we fulfill certain social roles. And these roles, they act as masks, they act as boxes which, inhabit and constrain our being. But for many people, these boxes become confining or even suffocating. They limit your true expression. They leave, and as a consequence of that limitation of authentic expression, it will leave you restless and dissatisfied and emotionally unwell without understanding why. And the root cause of this unrest, the root cause of this confining of expression into a box, is our mind, is ourselves, and the reality which we have constructed and assimilated into. Yet often we have a tendency to externalize blame. We see ourselves as a victim of circumstance or a victim to an unfair world. And this mindset, whilst understandable, is by its very nature disempowering. A victim mentality will trap you, and it will ensnare you in a world of ever increasing and ever reinforced self-imposed limitations. And these limitations will keep you from finding the freedom that you truly seek. And so to transcend the mind's limitations, you must recognize its limitless potentials. You should recognize the labels, the judgments, the categorizations that the mind constructs as in their nature illusions. And to see this truth, you must look beyond thought itself. And beneath the noise of the mind is silence. And this silence, it is paradoxically both empty and full. It is limitless and eternal. It is the space form. It is a space from which all thoughts arise and into which they dissolve. And when we identify with this silence rather than the fleeting stories of the mind, we find freedom. Thoughts, they may still arise, but they no longer dominate or define our highest identity. And living from this space of silence is true freedom. It is a state where creativity flows effortlessly and untainted by the ego. For it is in silence that we remember that we are not separate from nature, but are rather a part and process of its unfolding. The ego, a construct of thought, creates the illusion of separateness. But when we look for the ego, we will not find the ego, but rather we will find the vastness of the whole. You know, the ego, to lose the ego is to lose something that didn't exist in the first place. It is like a ripple in an ocean which has forgotten that it is the ocean itself, it is an expression of the ocean. And when you rediscover that you are the ocean, you find silence. You find a silence which has always been and always will be, for it is the essence of who we are. And in this silence, the mind is emptied of its stories, of its judgments, of its limitations. And when the mind is empty, you are in a movement of alignment with the natural flow of existence. You are moving in harmony with life rather than against it, rather than against the grain currents of the ocean. And this is the freedom of the silent mind. This is the peace and creativity which naturally arises when we transcend the illusions of thought and when we rest in the stillness of being.